Okay, so just imagine a continent completely shattered by war, right? Stuck in this endless cycle of destruction. And the only way out? Well, it was to totally reinvent how countries even talk to each other. That's the world Jean Monnet was looking at. He was one of the masterminds behind what became the European Union. And today, we're going to dive right into his own words to really get his powerful and, believe me, still very relevant vision for peace. And this one sentence, written way back in 1966, just gets right to the core of everything he was trying to fix. For him, the devastation, it wasn't just about rebuilding buildings, not at all. It was about rebuilding trust. It was about finally breaking this centuries-long cycle of superiority and domination that had cost so many lives.
So, this is the man himself, Jean Monnet. Now, what's interesting is he wasn't a president or a prime minister, but as the head of his Action Committee for the United States of Europe, man, did he have influence. He was a total pragmatist. He knew that you couldn't get peace just by signing treaties. Nope. You needed real, concrete action that would completely change the game, change how countries fundamentally looked at one another.
All right, so to really get what Monnet was aiming for, we've got to see the world like he did. And what he saw was a continent that was just deeply unstable. But he had a pretty clear idea of what the problem was. He saw a world that was just dangerously out of balance. I mean, think about it. You had the individual nations of Europe, and on their own, they were just completely dwarfed by the massive scale of the United States and the Soviet Union. And for Monnet, this huge imbalance, that was the real problem. That's what was fueling all the distrust and tension, making any kind of real, lasting peace totally impossible.
And wow, this table just puts that imbalance in stark numbers. And this is data Monnet himself was looking at. I mean, just look at the military spending, missile counts. The US and the USSR are playing in a totally different league, and the European nations, even when you lump the original 6 members of the community together, they're not even in the same ballpark. It's just a massive gap.
But here's the thing. This wasn't just about numbers on a spreadsheet. Monnet argued that this imbalance had a really toxic effect on a psychological level. For Europeans, it created this complex of fear, this constant worry that they'd be dominated or just dragged into some conflict they had no say in. And for the Americans, well, it created this temptation to just go it alone, right? To solve global problems by themselves because, hey, who was going to stop them?
Okay, so you've got this super dangerous inequality. What was Monnet's solution? Well, it was brilliant, it was ambitious, and honestly, it would change the course of history.
His big idea was what he called an equal partnership. And the logic was actually pretty simple. If the countries of Europe are too small to be equals on their own, well, then they should unite. The idea was to pool all their economic and political power to create one single entity, something big enough to sit down at the table with the United States, not as some junior partner, but as a genuine equal.
And this is a really important point. The goal here wasn't to confront America. It wasn't about creating a new rival superpower. Not at all. It was all about restoring balance. Monnet was convinced that a partnership of equals would be way stronger, more stable, and really the only way to build a foundation for a peace that would actually last.
And here's the kicker. Monnet didn't see the US as a roadblock to this plan. Actually, it was the opposite. He saw America as one of the biggest supporters of European unity. He'd point to things like the Marshall Plan after the war, or even President Kennedy's call for a partnership, as proof that America got it. They understood that they needed a strong, unified Europe to actually deal with.
But look, this was way more than just a nice idea. Like we said, Monnet was all about action, and his committee put together a very specific blueprint, a real plan for making this whole vision happen. You can basically read the committee's resolutions like a step-by-step guide. So in 1971, the goals were crystal clear. First up, get Great Britain to join. That expansion was absolutely critical. At the same time, they had to start the really tough work of building an economic and monetary union. And, super important, they needed to start reshaping that relationship with the US so it was based on this new idea of equality.
Okay, now fast forward just 2 years to 1973. Britain is in, which is a huge win. So the committee says, right, our most urgent task now is to go full steam ahead on that monetary union. And this meant building actual institutions, things like a European Monetary Fund. It meant getting organized so that the community could show up on the world stage and speak with one single voice. The whole point was to take this from an idea and make it real. So, after 2 decades of just relentless work, Monnet decides in 1975 that it's time to step down as the committee's president. But you have to understand, this wasn't him quitting or giving up. It was more like a handover. The movement he had kicked off, well, it had a life of its own now.
And this exchange of letters, it's really something special. On the left, that's Monnet's letter to his colleagues, including the famous American diplomat Averell Harriman, basically saying the Action Committee's job is done. And on the right, you see Harriman's response, and it just perfectly shows the incredible amount of respect Monnet had all around the world.
Harriman's letter just sums up the whole legacy perfectly. He tells Monnet that he started a momentum which cannot be turned aside. Think about that. The committee wasn't shutting down because it failed. It was shutting down because it had succeeded. It had created this unstoppable force, a movement toward a united Europe that was so strong it didn't even need its founding father to keep it going anymore.
So what Monnet and his committee did was just incredible. They laid the foundation. They turned a dream into a real political and economic force. But all their work really leaves us with a huge question, one that's just as relevant today. How does that challenge from decades ago, the challenge of getting this incredibly diverse continent to speak with one voice, how does that still shape Europe's place in the world? The momentum is definitely there, just like Harriman said, but it kind of feels like the work is never really done.